in the Atacama Desert, you can see the mountain of discarded clothes from space.
Hello, and welcome to Holistic Ambition, where we talk with visionary leaders who are redefining what it means to be ambitious and successful. We cover ways you can live with more well being, meaning, and fun in your career, business, and relationships. I'm your host, Stephanie Thoma, life coach for ambitious professionals and author of Confident Introvert. Today, we have Nicole Robertson with us. She is the founder and CEO of Swap Society, an online clothing swap for women and kids that makes it easy and affordable for members to mix up their wardrobes sustainably. Prior to founding Swap Society, Nicole's passion for the environment led her to work as VP of marketing for bioplastics manufacturer Cereoplast. A cosmetics industry veteran, she previously held senior level positions for beauty companies, including Beautyfix and Dermstore.com, Fred Siegel Beauty, and Procter & Gamble's Reflect. She is also an accomplished musician and retired dancer who lives in the LA area with her husband and their two sons. So, oh my gosh, there's so much to dive into here. And I'd like for us to even begin with getting started, like making that transition from the environment to cosmetics to fashion. Can you kind of walk us through that?
Sure. So I am a singer. I've always performed my whole life. I was a professional dancer. And, you know, and I love performing. I love the arts. And I remember when I was in college, I was a freshman in college, and I was at Roosevelt University in Chicago studying vocal music, acting, dance, the whole, all of those things that I just love so much. And there was a mandatory stage makeup class. And the man who taught the class was an actor and a director and a makeup artist. And he said, if you're a makeup artist, you'll never have to wait tables. And that just really struck me. And I thought, wow, doing makeup sounds way more fun than waiting tables to me. So I just promptly went out and started getting jobs working for beauty companies. And I became a makeup artist, and I would just, use that as a way to supplement my income when I was dancing and singing. And so I had this kind of wild schedule of, doing makeup usually by day and, plus dance rehearsals and classes, and then like singing at night or, dancing, performing in shows at night and that sort of thing. So I did that for a long time. And then gradually over time, I started working on the corporate side of the beauty industry. So I really, it was cool because I had the opportunity to have some really great mentors who basically, I think they just saw potential in me, and they saw, things that they thought I could do, and they just kind of showed me how to do it and showed me the ropes. And so I really kind of literally did that, like worked from the ground up kind of story. And I had a really great career in the beauty industry for some time. And I got to work with some really cool brands and, some really cool retailers. So at first I worked more on the brand side, and then I started to get on the retail side. And then I started getting more into kind of the e-commerce side. And I learned so many things. I always loved learning new things and doing new things. So I'm not a person that could just learn one thing and just do that on repeat forever. Like I really crave newness and learning. And so for me, it was really great to be able to also be in that career in a time when e-commerce was first happening. I'm aging myself a little bit, but I worked for, one of the first online beauty platforms, which was a P&G brand, which you had mentioned, Reflect.com, and even back in the day when I worked for Dermstore.com, launching Beautyfix.com, which was a beauty subscription service, all of those things at that time were very new. And so that was always really exciting and fun to me. But I'm really passionate about the environment. And so I had an opportunity to work for a bioplastics manufacturer. And everybody thought I was crazy to leave the beauty industry because I had worked in it for so long. But I really was excited to do something different and learn about this new material that was more sustainable. And I've learned since then that, just since taking that job and then also, after, bioplastics are not a cure-all. I never thought that they were, but, they have their pros and their cons. They're not going to save the environment per se, but I was really excited to go into something that was different, to take my skill set and apply it to something totally new, and prove that to myself too. Like, oh, can I do something other than the beauty industry? That was kind of something that I think I was also proving to myself at that time. And the answer is yes. I was able to transition to a totally different industry. And I did that for a while. And then I started having kids. So I started consulting, and I was working for beauty companies, bioplastic companies, a music company, kind of a little bit of all the different sauces that I had done before I eventually launched Swap Society.
Amazing. So, I hear this trajectory of even hearing a little nugget of wisdom from a former, it sounds like teacher who said, if you don't want to wait tables, here's another option that sparked something for you. And, when I think of cosmetics and I think of, let's say, fashion and clothing, there are certainly parallels when it comes to how you present yourself. And I'm curious, when it comes to sustainability, uh, how did you know that that was a part of your purpose or what you'd want to create? Like, can you kind of walk us through the journey of being immersed in beauty and then having this opportunity and then actually becoming an entrepreneur with those skill sets?
Sure. I was a little environmentalist at a young age, even as a child. I don't know how or why it happened, but probably I learned something at school that made me feel like, oh, we have to take care of the environment. But I remember, you know, I would always tell people in my family to turn off the water while they brushed their teeth and, that sort of thing. So I think that just was always in me, but it was never a part of my career. And I think that as I got older, and as more knowledge became available, it became more interesting to me. And so I think then once I did work for Saraplast, I started doing like a deeper personal dive into my own personal consumption, because I was thinking a lot about life cycle assessments of products. And then I was thinking about my personal carbon footprint. Around the time that I was there was a carbon footprint calculator that came out. I was thinking about how much energy do I use? How many resources am I using? How much water am I using? And all of those things. And that's when I started getting really serious about sustainable fashion for myself. I learned that this fashion industry is one of the biggest polluters, one of the biggest industrial polluters in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, water pollution, and waste. And so I thought, oh no, I love fashion. I've always loved clothes. I've always loved mixing up my wardrobe. And then I had this realization that wasn't great for the earth. And then I started learning that there were also all of these terrible human rights abuses that are very prevalent even today in the fashion industry. So that's when I started looking for alternatives to buying new clothes. So that's ultimately how I led to swapping in my local community and then eventually launching my business.
And, I'm curious, I'm sure that there are people listening that maybe they've hosted their own clothing swap. So I'd love to hear if you have tips for them. But then from the business side of going beyond your own immediate circle, you've created Swap Society that makes swapping clothing accessible across across many different, state lines. So I'm curious about, let's say, if you could give tips for the person that's like, hey, I want to do a clothing swap and do it right in person. And then if you could tell us how you went from that yourself to elevating to be able to help connect more people with these sustainable clothing swaps.
Sure. Well, for people that are hosting their own swaps, there are a lot of different ways that you can do it, certainly. I think that if you're just doing it with your girlfriends, anything goes, right? Everybody can just show up with clothes and try stuff on and have drinks and snacks and mix it up and have fun. But if you're doing it with maybe strangers, people in your broader community or acquaintances, maybe people you don't know as well, I think that then you have to have more parameters, because you need to make sure that, really important, you have to make sure that there are going to be the right sizes for everyone. So if you're going to open it up to, say, a lot more people, you want to make sure that there will be at least a few people of all the different size categories, because otherwise, who wants to show up to a swap and there's nothing that fits them? So that's one of the really big things that you have to think about that I think can sometimes go overlooked. I've heard some people say, "Oh, I've gone to swaps where there was nothing in my size." And, and it just wasn't a fun experience for them. And then you want to think about, are you going to accept any and everything? Do you only want certain types of brands? What are the parameters about what people can bring and not bring? I also recommend, if it's something that you're going to do, say you're doing an event for your community and it's not just something on the smaller side, you have to think about, are you going to use a token system or a ticket system? How are you going to value the clothes? Or is it just a one-to-one? Most swaps are a one-to-one. And then you also have to think about, are you going to limit how much people can bring? I've hosted a number of in-person swaps on a big scale. These have been big community events. And literally people will roll up with giant trash bags full of clothes, mountains of clothes. And it's impossible to be able to process that many things from each person. So what I've always done is I've always said 5 or 10 items max that are guaranteed to kind of be processed that day. And it also helps people pick out really good things. If people are just showing up with they're doing a Marie Kondo of their closet and they have the Marie Kondo mountain, that is impossible to manage. So it's important to tell people what the rules are, because as an event organizer, you just have to make sure that you can handle what's coming to you. The way that we would always do it was, we would say, X amount of items can be swapped that day, but if they wanted things to be given into the online swap, they could drop it off to us and we would deal with it later. But it's just, when you have, 50 people or 100 people or more, at any given moment, you need to make sure that you can, manage how many garments you're getting. And you have to check them for condition. Honestly, people aren't great at checking their own stuff for condition. So that's something else. You need to make sure that you have something in place for that. Tables, clothing racks, how are you going to display everything, that sort of thing. And then the vibe, music, drinks, snacks, whatever you want to have.
And then I'm curious, for someone who's thinking, okay, this sounds like a fun event, but what if someone says, I think I would just rather drop everything off at Goodwill? What would you say to them?
I mean, you can certainly do that, but I would love to tell everyone that less than 20% of thrift shop donations ever get resold. I would say, if hosting your own clothing swap or participating in one isn't going to work for you, maybe offer things to your neighbors and your local Buy Nothing group. I find that that's a really great way to rehome things. I think of donating to thrift shops personally as a last resort, because the reality is that thrift stores get way more than they can actually sell. And so even though people are well-meaning when they donate their items, they often wind up in a landfill anyway, or getting bailed up and shipped to countries like Ghana. There's, there are just so many places. I mean, you can even, sorry, I get so passionate about this, but like in the Atacama Desert, you can see the mountain of discarded clothes from space. That's how much, it's just the amount of clothing that we're discarding it's just unbelievable. It's terrible. So I think that we often think, oh, I took it to the thrift store, so I did a good thing. Somebody in need is going to get my clothing, but that's actually not how it works in reality.
And then, I'm curious, when it comes to Swap Society as a platform, how does that differ from, let's say, a Poshmark? And, I know that there's the key element of swapping, the point system. Can you share more about that?
Absolutely. Well, we are not technically a resale platform. So like Poshmark is peer-to-peer selling. So you take your pictures of your clothes and you write a description and you hope to sell it. And then if it does sell, you handle the shipping and you do all of that work, right? Same thing with platforms like eBay. There are also other sites like ThredUp, which is more of like an online thrift shop, which in some ways is a little more similar to what we're doing in the sense that, you send your clothes to them, but then they pay you, but hardly anything. I mean, you get pennies on the dollar for what you spent. I think the average is like 2 to 4% of original retail value is what you'll get on average for your items. Sometimes higher value items that can change, but for most of the stuff that gets sent in, and they take less than 40% of your items for resale, and then you shop. And then you shop the site. For us, we are actually a swap. So people send us the clothes that they're done with, and then we accept things as long as they're in great condition. Stains, rips, tears, pet hair, those sorts of things, we won't take those items, but we take everything, even clothes that are missing the tags, even if they're unbranded, because we believe that all wearable clothing should be kept in circulation for as long as possible. So when someone joins, they get a welcome kit, which is basically a bag with a prepaid mailing label, so they can send us their clothes. They just take it to the post office or leave it out for their letter carrier. We go through the clothes, and then we created an alternative currency that gives value to every garment. So we give multidimensional value. So we created this whole cool algorithm. So the people that are processing the garments, they enter in a bunch of data about the garment, from the brand and the condition and the season and all of those things. And then, our system generates a value. So that you're going to get equal value out of the swap for the items that you send in. So it's a lot more fair than a one-to-one. So people are okay sending in their designer stuff because they know they're going to get more swap coin for that. And then you spend your swap coin. So there is a membership fee, and there's also a per item fee, but it's really just nominal service fees. But really the value of the garments is in swap coin.
Yeah. So I love how sort of sophisticated this is, where, if anyone's been to a clothing swap, and let's say if they have a designer piece and they're swapping it for something from Target, it's like, maybe that there could be a better system in place. So I'm so happy that you have that code. And, when it comes to, there are a couple of things I want to touch on when it comes to success, like beyond the financial pieces. I'd love for you to share a bit about the triple bottom line perspective.
Sure. The triple bottom line is something that takes not only financial success into account, but, sustainability and also equity for humans. Are you creating a business that doesn't harm your fellow humans, doesn't harm the environment, but also is creating profit, which is not always the easiest thing to do. We live in a capitalist society, and oftentimes I think a lot of businesses don't take into consideration the environment or the exploitation of workers, which is often how some of these companies, especially these fast fashion companies, are able to make so much money. The reason that fast fashion garment is so cheap is because someone was exploited. There shouldn't be $5 t-shirts. There's so much that goes into making a garment, from sourcing the fibers and making the fabric to sewing the garment to packaging it up. It's getting shipped probably overseas. It has to be taken through a shop. I mean, they say that about 200 pairs of hands touch every garment before it reaches the consumer. So the cheap fast fashion stuff just doesn't make sense. So then you think, well, but how are these companies so successful? How are they making so much money? And the answer is that they're exploiting their workers, and they're not taking care of the environment in the process. And so, for me, I'm really passionate about trying to let people know what's really happening. I don't think people think about it. I didn't think about it. I didn't know. But then once I knew, I couldn't unlearn it. And it completely changed the way I approached my wardrobe.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a valid point that, especially if, let's say, someone has been just on autopilot, going by a Forever 21, a Zara, whatever, H&M, it's like, wait a second, how is it this cheap? Is it actually worth it to you once you can't unlearn how some of these garments become accessible at those price points. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. And I'd also love for you to touch on degrowth and why that's so important.
Sure. Well, degrowth is kind of, contrary to our current economic model of capitalism. But, capitalism is based on infinite growth, but we live on a planet with finite resources. And so we really have to start thinking about how do we stop overutilizing Earth's resources and still having a healthy society where people can thrive? And so that's really going to, take a massive shift in the mindset of people all around the world. And I don't, there are some really interesting economists out there. Like Dr. Jason Hickel has a really interesting book, and I promise, even though it's a book written by an economist, it's actually a really easy read and really interesting. But I think, if I'm remembering correctly, I think it's called "How Degrowth Will Save the World," something to that effect. And he really gets deep into those topics as well. So I really recommend it if you're curious about learning more. But there's no way that we can keep having this constant growth because we're using more resources than the earth can regenerate on its own.
Yeah. So see, another valid point that not everyone has awareness of. And, I'm curious, let's say that someone listening is wondering something actionable that they can do right away to reduce their carbon footprint, to reduce their overconsumption. What are maybe one, two, or even three key things that are pretty easy to implement that more people could be doing today?
Sure. Well, I think that if you really feel the need to buy something or the desire to buy something, try to get it secondhand, whether it's a piece of furniture or something for your closet. There's a stat that I love to share that swapping a shirt with a friend instead of buying a new one saves enough water for a person to drink for 2.5 years, because there's so much water that's necessary to produce brand new clothing. So even small things like that. I would also say one of the biggest things that you can do is, if you're a meat eater, eat less meat. That doesn't mean that you have to become a vegan, because obviously I know that that's not for everyone. But eating less meat can have a major impact. And, just being a little more thoughtful about everything. Turn off the lights when you leave a room, turn off the water when you brush your teeth. My inner child will, try to remind you about that. All of these little things do add up. But I would say one of the most important things is support and vote for people that are taking climate change seriously, that are going to support legislation that's going to make big changes. Because it's important that we do these little changes in our personal lives, but we also need system change.
Yeah, the micro and the macro. So yeah, thanks for those tips that I think people right away, it's just a slight pause. It's like, wait a second, is there a way to not, let's say, buy a new shirt? Like, I love that as just like even one of the many key takeaways from this conversation. And, as we begin to wrap up, I'm curious, how, maybe in a word, how do you define ambition?
I think, for me, ambition is sustainable. It has to be sustainable, right? For me and my current kind of form of who I am. And I think it's very driven by passion. I think you have to be passionate about something. And that's going to fuel that ambition and, for you to take steps in your life to achieve your goals.
Yeah, sustainability and passion. And then, maybe even elaborating upon that a little further, what does holistic ambition mean to you?
I think that, when we think about holism, we often think about ourselves, right? Like holistic living, how can we be healthier, wellness, personal wellness. But I would love for people to think beyond the individual and think about our broader communities and the broader world, that, we can all lift each other up. We can all make the world a better place while making our own personal lives better as well. And we need to think more about kind of that interconnectedness of all people and animals and plants in the world.
I love that. What a beautiful sort of closing here, where it's like, holistic. We think of do yoga, like be well. But also it's like, hey, let's also take a look outside and how, let's say, each person is empowered to make a change and to help the world. That's truly what you stand for. And, for those that are listening in, they're like, I want more. Like, how do they stay connected with you? How can they learn more about you?
Sure. So our website is swapsociety.co. And we're on social at Swap Society. On Facebook, though, we're at We Are Swap Society, but most platforms we're at Swap Society. We also have a podcast, which you can find on YouTube at Swap Society or wherever you get your podcasts as well.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Nicole, for your time today and sharing all of your insights. And I'd like to thank everyone at home or wherever you are for watching and tuning in, and consider subscribing to be the very first to know of the next Holistic Ambition speaker in our series. Wishing you a beautifully sustainable day. Until next time.